Today we're going to be talking about persuasion and what exactly is persuasion. We're going to do this by talking about what it is and why we should bother to understand it. So, persuasion is what we do when we're trying to change somebody's behavior, point of view, attitude, or beliefs. I may have mentioned in one of the earlier lectures that some people will say that there's really only one reason we communicate, and that's to persuade the world. Even if in an informative speech, I may be informing you about Kim Kardashian, but aren't I persuading you that she's a person worthy to know about? There is a strong base in the communication field that believe that persuasion is the only reason we ever open our mouths or communicate at all. So where do we find these persuasive messages? Well, if it's the case that persuasion is all communication, we literally find them everywhere. You can find them on advertisements, in old 1942 propaganda from the Navy, in our video games, everywhere are examples of persuasion. So when I talk about attitudes, I'm talking about our general predisposition. Is something good or bad? Is it right or wrong? A great example of this is marriage equality. Do we believe that two people of the same gender have the right to marry? That it's a good thing, or is it a bad thing? Is our attitude on abortion rights, is that a good thing? Is it because it's positive or negative? We've got values. So how useful is something? What's the worth of something? And a great example of this is recycling. At one point in time, an old can was literally that. It had no value. It was empty, it was boring. But now with upcycling and recycling, we are starting to try to change our values on this and starting to see a value in what 30 years ago would be considered trash. Our beliefs. Well, beliefs are a little bit harder, aren't they? Our beliefs are something that we hold as true without absolute knowledge. A lot of times this is going to come down to our religion. Those are our beliefs. We want to persuade to change behaviors. That's kind of our whole reason. So let's watch this video really quick and think about what they're trying to persuade the audience.
"1,001 Stupid Things to Do," a book by Humphrey Hambone. Well, he knows them all. Yeah. Hey, could that be Pat's favorite lamp, the family heirloom? Yeah, could be. I borrowed it. I never thought he'd loan it to a clumsy dog. His priceless antique lamp. Yeah, well, I didn't say that he lent it to me. I said that I borrowed it without asking. Yes. Worry. Anything happens to that lamp, boy, I'll tell you, you'll be in a peck of trouble since you didn't bother to ask to borrow it. Oh. Glue. I need glue. 1,002 stupid things to do. Borrowing without asking. You're going to need lots of glue.
So this is literally a public service announcement from when I was a kid, which is why it's so scratchy and old. But why don't you go to the discussion page and tell me, what are they trying to persuade? What are they telling 6-year-old Gail Kirk sitting at home watching this on a Saturday morning? So why should we bother to understand persuasion? Well, the one is obvious, right? Success in persuading others. Persuasion is a form of power. If we go to an interview and we can persuade our interviewees that we are the people they want to hire, that is power. If we were able to persuade other people that our point of view is right, it's a certain amount of power that we have over them. Knowing how persuasion works can make us better consumers of information. We can look at the news coming out and say, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem to tell us the whole story. This seems like card stacking, which we're going to talk about in our next lecture of propaganda. And it's going to help us better understand what's happening around the world. For example, this is the exact same newspaper. It's the exact same date, it's the exact same picture, and yet two very different headlines. They're using different forms of persuasion through their loaded language to make a point. And there is a question on whether or not even the ads themselves are designed to affect certain audience members. Trump softens his tone, or Trump talks tough on wall? Who do you think each version of this newspaper is trying to persuade? Kind of the same thing, but obviously a cartoon. We've got liberal times, inspections are working, and war is working, conservative daily. We've got timber industry aids U.S. forest, and U.S. forest policy aids timber industry. Even those small changes can mean something. Two different newspapers, both liberal-leaning, Washington Post and the New York Times, but two very different takes of the Benghazi panel. If you're not familiar with the Benghazi panel, it was a couple years ago, about 3 now, dealing with an embassy in Benghazi that was attacked and U.S. service members and an embassy worker killed. This again, same newspaper, same day, same photo, two very different headlines, making their voices heard versus tensions boil over at the rally. Think of that loaded language. Finally, speaking of language, I really don't want you to use in this speech the word I believe, or could, or will. Have those powers or your convictions. If you want to write down, well, I believe that this will make a big change in the world, just take out I believe. This will make a big change in the world. Instead of saying, this could create tax relief for millions of Americans, this will create tax relief for millions of America. Make sure you have the vividness of your argument. If you sound wishy-washy, why should we believe you? Again, what are they trying to convince us here? That the Navy are men, right? That this is the place to join. These are the things that we should look out for when we're looking at persuasion. So finally, we talked a little bit about persuasion. We talked about what persuasion is and why we should understand persuasion.